Alrighty, so before we get into it, I just wanted to say, however you managed to come across this video, thank you for clicking on it. I did spend quite a bit of time working on this project, so that's much appreciated. And if you're interested in playing the game on screen for yourself, I will leave a link to the website in the description. And if you're interested in the code behind the website, I will leave a link to its GitHub repository page down in the description as well. And before we start talking about what's on screen here, I do want to take a moment to quickly pop over to talk about this. Now, if you're not familiar with what this is Wordle. Wordle is an immensely popular daily web game that's owned by the New York Times, and essentially the premise is every single day, the player and every other player around the world will get the same 5-letter word to guess for that day. Now, it's not like a traditional guessing game where you're given a hint outright. Instead, you're given context clues based on the guesses that you've already made. So right here, I can start off with any 5-letter word, but I'm going to go ahead and start with, oh, that's not how you spell it, with sepia. So I can just go ahead and submit that. And as you can see, the different letters of the word have changed color depending on their relevance to the mystery word that we're ultimately after. So as you can see here, the letters E, P, and A have all turned gray, and that means that none of these letters appear in the mystery word. I has lit up yellow, and what that means is that it's in the mystery word, but it's in the wrong position. And S has lit up green, which means that it is in the mystery word, and it's also in the right position. So whatever the mystery word is, it's going to start with S. Now, ideally, a good player would take this information and use it to make a subsequent, more accurate guess. So a good guess to go from here would be a word like snide, because it utilizes that S in the beginning, which we know the mystery word starts with an S. We also move the I one position because we know the I is in the word, but it's just not that fourth letter. So moving it gives us more coverage. And we're also replacing the letters E, P, and A with the letters N, I, and E to cover more ground. So I'm perfectly fine with this. I'm going to go ahead and submit this as well. And as you can see, we got closer. We now have 2 green letters and also a new yellow letter. And that kind of is the core idea of how Wordle works. You keep going and going, getting more yellow and green squares until you have the whole row that's green, and then you win. Now, for the purposes of this video, I have unfortunately committed the great Wordle sin of looking up the answer beforehand. And I do not condone this behavior at home, so please don't do it in your own time. But the Wordle answer today is sling. So just for demonstration purposes only, I go ahead and submit that. As you can see, the whole row goes green. We get this little message here, impressive, letting us know that we're impressive. And there you go. We get the congratulations screen. You close that, and that's pretty much it. That's all there is to Wordle. And because I enjoy Wordle so much, I decided to create my own spin on the game. So I came out with HexGuessr. HexGuessr is very similar to Wordle in that the player is trying to guess a daily item of interest. However, in HexGuessr, that item is a color instead of a word. Now, you might be asking yourself, how do you Wordle a color? And that's an excellent question. Basically, every single color that can be rendered by your computer screen's individual pixels each have a unique code associated with the color that they produce. I know that was a mouthful, so I pulled up this site here just to sort of explain it. So as you can see, this shade of blue right here, it has its own unique corresponding code, and that would be 017DBB. This pink here also has its own unique code, as for all of the different shades of colors here. Each unique shade has its own unique code. These codes are called hex codes. They're always going to be 6 digits long, and they're going to be composed of the numbers 0 through 9 and the letters A through F. I'm going to talk a little bit more about hex codes later, but just for now, just to understand the gist of how HexGuessr works, you're guessing the mystery color by guessing its mystery hex code. But other than that, we can pretty much get started with the site tour. So at the top left, we have the title art for the website. This is actually ASCII art, so I went to a text generator. I just typed in HexGuessr and it spat this out. So what you see here is just a bunch of text characters, like the block characters, and they've been assembled into this unique formation. I did have to edit it a little bit to get it into this sort of square shape, but I really like it because I think it really complements the retro aesthetic that I was going for. And it also has a cool feature. So if you click on it, it'll change color. Isn't that so interesting? It cycles between 9 preset colors. I don't know why I added that. I just thought it would be cool because it's a site about guessing colors, and you click the title and it changes color. Anyway, moving on. The top right, we have our mode selector. So unlike Wordle, if you wanted to play more than 1 game per day, you're more than welcome to do so. All you'd have to do is click the unlimited mode button and you would be redirected, and from there you can play as many colors as you would like. Down here we have the how to play panel button, and when you click it, it it opens the how to play panel. It's very self-explanatory, but for players who are new to HexGuessr, players who are clicking the link for the website for the very first time, this is going to open automatically. And this is just going to give players the runaround about how the game works, the rules, the feedback system, etc. So the goal of HexGuessr is to match the hidden target color by entering its corresponding 6-digit hex code into the grid. And players will only get 5 attempts of doing so, and they can only reveal the target color that they're trying to guess once per attempt. And so the way it works is they're going to click the reveal square to briefly preview the target color, and they're only going to be able to see that color for a very short moment. So the idea is they're going to internalize that color for that short moment that it's visible, and then they're going to use the tools at their disposal, including a color canvas and a hue slider, to help fine-tune that guess. And then once they're happy with that fine-tuning process, they can go ahead and submit it into the grid. Then they can use the feedback that they get to improve their next subsequent guesses. And the feedback system is color-coded just like Wordle. However, unlike Wordle, it's proximal based instead of positional based. So what that means is cells will change colors depending on how far off that individual cell is from being correct, instead of trying to figure out if the content of that cell is in the right place, if that makes sense. So green means that the digit is correct, yellow means the digit is off by 1, orange means the digit is off by 2 or 3, and gray means the digit is off by more than 3. So for example, if in a particular cell the correct answer is, let's just say 6, if you put 6 in that cell, it'll light up green. If you put up 7 or 5, it'll be yellow. If you put in 3, 4, 8, or 9, you will get orange. And then anything beyond that, you're going to get gray. Down here, you have some tips and controls just to help players get oriented with how the game works, some of the more intricate systems. You also have a description about the differences between modes. And at the very bottom, for players who are new to hex codes, they can click this link here, which I assume would be most players. I don't think most people are familiar with the hex code system. And they can click this link here, and it will take them to this website. This is W3 School. And I specifically picked this website because I think it does a great job of explaining hex codes, but even more so because it has this little interactable element that people can use to really get their hands dirty and understand how the system works. Now, the way it works is the first 2 digits of any hex code determines the amount of red in that particular color. So if I were to lower this value, and as you can see, the first 2 digits of the hex code are being decreased, we get less red. So the first digits are now at a minimum of 0, 0. We have the lowest value of red. And if I slowly increase this, you will see that the color begins to turn more red. So now we are at the maximum value of FF. As you can see, the amount of red in the color has increased. The middle 2 values here indicate the amount of green in the color. So as you can see, the minimum of 0, 0, that's the least amount of green we can have. And as I increase it, you can see the color begins to get more and more green. And following with this pattern, the last 2 digits determines the amount of blue in the color. So as I decrease that, we get less blue. And as I increase it more, we get more blue. Now, if I decrease all of these values to 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, we get the color black. And if I increase it to its maximum of FF, 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 you can see we get the color white. As I previously said, the system uses the numbers 0 through 9 and the letters A through F. And the letters A through F are used because the numbering system we're using here is called a hexadecimal system. Now, our traditional numbering system only have the values 0 through 9, but we need to be able to represent values like 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. So those values are represented by the letters A, B, C, D, E, F. So that's pretty much how hex codes work. A is 10, B is 11, all the way up to F, which is 15. So what you're seeing here is essentially the value 15, 15, 15, 15, 15, 15, and the ultimate maximum value. Moving on, you have the stats button, and clicking that will show you an aggregate of statistics across multiple HexGuessr games. And I'm going to talk more about these stats after we play a game so you can see how they change. But just like the title, there's also another Easter egg here. If you click any of the cells, you get this nice sort of population of color that stems from the original cell that you clicked on. So if you click a cell, all the color will sort of emanate from there. Again, this is completely unnecessary, but I added it just for fun. I think it adds a little bit of character, so I just went ahead and did it. Right over here, we have the light mode, dark mode toggle, and if you click it, does as advertised. Whoa. That's so cool, dark mode. We're gonna stick with light mode for now, just for the purposes of this video. Down here, we have the main section of the game. In the top left, we have the reveal square that we talked about briefly in the how to play part. And when I click this right here, I'm not gonna click it right now, but when I click it, what's gonna happen is the mystery color is going to be revealed in this square for a very short time. This timer bar will tick down very rapidly, and I'm going to be expected to internalize that color as best as possible, and then use these tools down here. This is the color canvas and the hue slider to recreate it to the best of my ability, and then take the resulting output here. So this is the color that we created and its corresponding hex code, and then take that and submit it into the grid, and then go on from there, go ahead and make more and more accurate guesses until we ultimately get the hex code of the mystery color that we're trying to solve for. Speaking of the grid, here it is. As you can see, nothing too different from Wordle. The only difference is we have this little prefix here. This is common in hex code notation. A lot of times when you see hex codes in text or in code, they'll be preceded by a hashtag, and that's just so that the person reading or the code knows that it's a hex code and not just a mess of numbers and text. I'll talk a little bit more about this button here. You'll probably see me use it when I play a game, but if I don't, I'll make sure to explain it later. Down here we have the keyboard. Just like Wordle, you can use this on-screen keyboard to help you input your guesses, and at the very bottom we have a footer with a link to my GitHub. And that's pretty much all there is to HexGuessr. So I think now would be a great time for me to demo you a game. So let's just go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and click this right here. Okay, I internalized that. As you can see, the timer bar ticked down. We clicked it that one time, and now it says submit a guess to reveal again. So as I said, you only get one time to look at the mystery color, and then the only way to look at it again is to submit a guess. So you get one reveal per attempt. That color was like a very dark blue, so I'm gonna go something like, let's go with that right there. So I'm happy with this right here. I think that's close enough. So its hex code would be 23467A. So I can just go ahead and type that in, 67A. Now I can just go ahead and submit that by clicking enter. And as you can see, the different cells have changed color, and this is going back to that feedback system that I talked about previously. I'm gonna reveal the color again just to see how far off I was. So I'm gonna click it right here. Okay, so I was off by quite a bit. It looked a little bit more purple than what I remember. So I'm gonna go ahead and go here, maybe a little bit more vibrant. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. So I can go ahead and take this and now put that into the grid here. And unlike what I did with the first guess, I don't have to manually type it out each time. If I wanted to, I could just go ahead and use this button here to copy what's in the field here. And as you can see, we get that copy notification. Then I can scroll down and use this button here to paste what I have copied into the grid. There we go. We've gotten that pasted in. Now I'm noticing a few discrepancies from our previous guess. We know that because the first letter or digit is yellow, that this value can only be 1 or 3. And we know that because the 3 here is gray, it's going to be off by more than 3. So we know that it can't be 4, 5, or 6. So this is probably going to be 7 or higher. We know that this value just straight up isn't 4, so it can't be 4. We also know that this can't be E. It has to either be 8, 9, 4, or 3, because the 6 is orange and it's off by 2 or 3. So I'm going to edit this just a little bit. And I'm not exactly using the field here to sort of verify what I'm doing here, but I am just trying to get a little bit more coverage just to sort of give me as much information as possible for the next guess that I'm going to make, because I know I can't get it in 2. So I'm just going to try to gather as much information as possible right now. So that pretty much aligns with the feedback we got on the previous guess. So I'm going to go ahead and submit that. As you can see, that definitely helped. We get a little bit more information. We know that for these two values here, they were orange, and now that they turned gray, we know that we went in the wrong direction for both of them. So for 4, this value here, I went higher, but because we know that 7 is gray, it's probably going to be lower. So it's either going to be 2 or 1. For the 6 here, it's orange, and I went lower, but because this is gray now, I know I should have gone higher. So I'm going to reveal the color again. Okay, so I can see that my color on the right is just a little bit too bright, so I'm gonna make it a little darker. I made some adjustments from what I did here, and I came with this, and I'm pretty happy with that, so I'm gonna go ahead and submit that. And we have gotten so much closer. We've gotten 3 yellow cells, so I should hopefully be able to narrow it down for these last 3 quite easily. It's the second one that's probably gonna be a little bit harder. I'm struggling a little bit to sort of narrow down that color while adhering to the guess that we made previously. I'm not exactly getting the numbers that I should get here just by manipulating these tools. So another thing that you can do for players who want to, they can edit this field directly. So I can just click into it and I can just change the value right here. So I think I want to go with a 9, probably 9 here as well. I'm okay with that being B. And for this last one, I'm going to go with 0. And I'm going to go ahead and copy it and paste it in. Perfectly happy with that. And there we go. Okay, we got it in 4. And as you can see, we get the nice little notification that appeared on the top if you caught that. And when we won, a little wave animation appeared as well over the grid, letting us know that we won. And the color of that wave animation is actually of the mystery color that we solve for. So every time you solve for a mystery color, you get a cool wave animation of that color playing over the grid. And when you complete a game, I did close it, but the stats panel does appear automatically. So when you win a game or lose a game, actually, whenever you complete a game, the stats panel will automatically open. And as you can see, we have a number of different stats. Right here, we get the total number of games played. And from that, we also get the number of games won and the number of games lost. Down here we get the win percentage, which is calculated by taking games won over games played. We also have our current win streak as well as our max win streak. Down in the bottom left, we get the average number of guesses across all our games. So this is calculated depending on whether you win or lose. How many guesses does it take for you to complete a game? Down here, we have our guess accuracy stat. So this will average across every single one of your guesses, how close to the mystery color you are on average. And then at the bottom right, furthering that stat, we have guess efficiency, which tells the player on average how much closer do you get to the mystery color per subsequent guess. And as you can see, I am quite good at this game. It's almost like I made it. But in all seriousness, I do think that my stats here are a little bit inflated just because I am familiar with the hex code system and how the game works. I think for an average player, they might struggle a little bit more, and that's perfectly fine as long as, you know, the challenge is there, but it's still feasible. I think HexGuessr sits at a pretty good difficulty range. Down here, we have the next color timer. This signifies to players how much time left before the next daily color becomes available. So for me, the next color will be available in 1 hour, 24 minutes, and 40 seconds. And once this timer hits 0000000, I can reload the page and play the new daily color. For those of you who were paying attention during the win animation, you might have noticed that the paste button down here actually changed its icon. And that's because when the game ends, the paste button changes into a share button. So if I were to click this button right here, you'll see we get a game results copied notification. And from here, I can go to any social media or any group chat and share my game with the world, my game results. So as you can see, if I were to paste it into this notepad here, you can see the game we just played. You get the mode in the top right, the date, as well as the number of attempts it took us to win, and our performance using emojis, and a link to the game at the bottom. I do want to quickly take a moment to show you guys how unlimited mode works. So as you can see, daily mode, you can only play 1 game per day. As you can see, the grid is locked, but if I wanted to play more than 1 game, I just click this button here and I get redirected. So for players who navigate to HexGuessr via HexGuessr.com, they're automatically going to load by default into the daily mode. But when you click the unlimited mode button, you get redirected to HexGuessr.com/unlimited. And the difference here is, unlike daily mode, the mystery colors are generated randomly locally. There's no external call to a host for necessary resources like the aforementioned daily color. Instead, everything is generated on your computer and you can play as many colors as you want. And I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate that for you. So I'm going to click right here to reveal the color. So as you can see, it was like some kind of like pinkish purplish color. So if I just play a game here, type some random stuff into the grid, I am messing up my stats, but it is for the video, so it is what it is. And there you go. We lose. It says practice makes perfect. So as you can see, we lost that game. The stats panel appears as normal. And if you were paying attention, you would notice that we actually didn't get the wave animation because losers don't get wave animations. And the stats panel appears as it does on daily mode. But as you can see at the bottom, instead of getting that next color timer, we get a play again button. Now, if I click this, you will see the grid gets cleared. And as I scroll up, as I click the reveal color, we have a completely new color that we can go ahead and, guess for. So There you go. You might have noticed this little asterisk message at the bottom. It says stats shown for unlimited mode. The stats you see here aren't the same as the stats that popped up when I completed the daily color, and that's because I have separated the stats based on the mode in which the player is in. And that's because I wanted to maintain the competitive integrity of the daily mode. Because basically on unlimited mode, anybody can kind of like just no life it for like a few hours straight and get some insane stats, versus on daily mode, you kind of have to keep up with that grind every day. So I wanted to maintain that distinction. So as you can see, each mode has their own unique stats. Now I'm going to reset the daily game that we just played just so I can show you a few quality of life features that are in HexGuessr. So to do that, all I have to do is go to inspect, go to application, go to local storage, and under local storage in HexGuessr.com, I'm going to delete the key values daily completion and daily game state. Now if I reload the page, as you can see, we get a clean slate for daily mode. You guys at home should not do this. Do not cheat, but if you're tinkering, go right ahead. And as you can see, if I click the color right here, it's the same daily color. It's that dark blue-ish purple. I don't exactly know, but it is the same color. Now, the first quality of life feature I want to talk about is the paste button. And I did use it during the demo. I showed you that you could copy a hex code from here and paste it using the icon. However, you don't have to use the icon if you don't want to. HexGuessr utilizes the on-screen keys, but it can also take advantage of your keyboard. So if I wanted to type something using my keyboard, I could 100% do that. I don't have to use on-screen keys, but that also extends to keyboard shortcuts. So if I were to do Control V or Command V, boom, there you go. It works perfectly. And this input is always caught regardless of whether you're clicked into the grid or not. And that's because the grid is always in focus by the browser. So if I were to just click off the grid, like I'm just clicking anywhere right here, if I were to still type something in, it still gets caught by the grid. And that's because this is the only element that's in focus by the browser at all times. The only time it's not in focus or catching your input is if you click into this field right here. And I did demo it during the playthrough, but just as you were able to edit this field using the color canvas and hue slider, you can edit the field directly just by typing into it. And as you can see, the edits that we make here are reflected and updated accordingly. So if I were to type just something like this, it gets updated in the color preview, but not only does it get updated in the color preview, it gets registered and reflected in the position of the canvas and the slider. So it's a two-way input-output mechanism. This changes this, as does this, and changing this will update the position of the slider and canvas. Essentially, they're both inputs and outputs depending on what's being edited. And getting these two elements here right, the color canvas and the hue slider, was very important because these are the most interactable elements on the game. And on mobile, there is a specific interaction I wanted to talk about. So because these two items on a narrow viewport like a phone, because they would take up so much horizontal space, I had to consider what would happen if players would try to scroll up by dragging on these surfaces. Let's just say, for example, like I'm in a mobile environment here. Let's say I start dragging, right? And then I wanted to drag up to scroll up, but I'm trying to drag on this element here. I wouldn't want to just start interacting with it, right? I want to be able to pull up from this to get to access the upper elements of the website, because it would be annoying if you're trying to scroll up on this and then you just start interacting with it. It would be a whole thing. So on mobile devices or touch enabled devices, if it's detected that you're using touch instead of a cursor, what it will do is the game will make you make a deliberate tap input first before either of these elements become interactable. So if I wanted to interact with the canvas here, I have to click on it first, and then I could, edit it and, manipulate it as I want to. And the same goes for the slider. I'd have to click on it first, and then I can edit it. If I don't make that deliberate tap input, then these elements don't work. So if I wanted to scroll by dragging on them, I 100% can. As you can see, I'm grabbing the color canvas and I can scroll just like that. So the same goes for the slider. Unless I click on it, it doesn't work. And as you can see, I can just use its surface to scroll up and down. So you would click into it, use it, and then when you're done, you can either click out of it, just like this, or you can click into it and then just start scrolling. and it works perfectly fine. So just making sure that the UI felt good on mobile and you weren't accidentally clicking on things that you didn't want to or interacting with those elements, that was very important. And by implementing this UI guard, I was able to successfully achieve that. The most understated quality of life feature in the whole game is actually this little hashtag right here. Now, I mentioned previously that this is necessary in like syntax and just for semantics. Whenever you're dealing with hex codes, you want to precede it with a hashtag. So it's implemented here out of tradition, but it's also utilized in two key features for players, whoever may need them. If you noticed during that daily game that I previewed, you might have seen that the color of this hashtag actually changed. So when I submit a guess into this field here, I'm just going to demo a guess here. As you can see, when I submit a guess, the color of the hashtag changes. Now this hashtag actually changes to the color of the hex code in the row that it's next to. So 555FFF actually represents this exact shade of blue that the hashtag has turned to. So at a glance, for players who have multiple guesses on screen or in the grid, they can quickly differentiate between each of their guesses, what each of their submissions corresponds to which color. So in terms of usability and information to the player, this is a great resource. But in addition to that, players can take advantage of this color change by actually clicking on it. So let's say you're working on a color up here, and you want to go back to a previous guess to edit that and maybe work on that a little bit more. You can 100% do that just by scrolling down and clicking on any of the previously submitted guesses, go to their hashtag, click it, and as you can see, we scroll up just a little bit, we get that loaded into the output field, and we can go ahead and then, edit it as needed. This is great for iteration and working with past guesses to help you narrow down the mystery color. And it's especially useful if you were to ever leave the site and come back later. So just like Wordle, if you were to leave an in-progress daily game and come back later, your progress would be completely saved. So I'm going to go ahead and reload the page. And as you can see, our progress is completely saved. Everything here is retained. Now, the data here, in terms of what was in the color picker, that isn't saved. And that's because we can just utilize the feature that I just talked about by clicking on it here. And we just get it populated, and we can do so as we need to. What is saved in the game area here is whether or not you have actually clicked the reveal square. So if I were to click this here and then reload the page, you will notice that the reveal square stays locked. So there's no cheesing, getting multiple looks at the mystery color. If you looked at it once, even if you reload the page, you're going to have to submit a guess to be able to see it again. So this data is saved and this data is saved. And that's pretty much all I have to talk about with HexGuessr itself. Now, you might be asking, why make a Wordle spin-off game about hex code specifically? If you're super into the Wordle spin-off space, you're probably aware that hex code guessing games do already exist, the most popular one being Hexcodal. As you can see, the premise is very similar. You're trying to guess the mystery target color by guessing its hex code. So as you can see, it's a dark green. So I can type anything here, and then I submit it and I get feedback just like in HexGuessr. However, here it's utilizing arrows instead of colors, although the idea is very similar. And the same goes with something like Wordle. The idea is you're trying to guess the color of this hashtag here, the prefix. And interestingly enough, with this game, the background color actually changes to the color of the hex code that you've already submitted. So that's also kind of cool. And you also get the colored system as well. So the very idea of a hex code Wordle isn't exactly new or original. But what I have found with existing versions of this game type is that all of them lack the implementation of a color picker tool like this one here. And unless you're super into the hex code space, you're already deeply invested and you're able to, calculate the hex code of a color in your brain, those games aren't really going to be the most approachable for normal people who just aren't familiar with that system. And the implementation of this picker here allows people who have no experience, complete beginners, to at the very least take a decent initial swing at the concept. you don't really need to understand hex codes to be able to, start working with this and enter a few good guesses into the grid. I think by adding this element here, it really lowers the bar for people to sort of try out this kind of game. Also, the addition of the timed reveal system that adds a little bit of dynamicism to the game as well, makes it a little bit more exciting. I think all of these things bundled together really helps set HexGuessr apart and make it its own thing. As far as how I made HexGuessr, before I decided to tackle the challenge of making this game, I had zero web development experience prior. So basically, HexGuessr really is my introduction to web development, and for me it was critical to ensure that this project had a tight, achievable scope. So early on, I decided to create a singular self-contained page with no backend, which meant no accounts, no database, and no infrastructure to maintain long term. So for me, it made sense to just go ahead and go with a simple stack of HTML, CSS, and JS. It also helped me get familiar with the bare bones of web development. As far as hosting goes, I decided to go with Cloudflare Pages. And the reason is because Cloudflare Pages specifically has great resources when it comes to static pages, as well as very generous resource request limits. And so with HexGuessr, you have that resource request every time you play the daily mode. You're fetching the daily color from the host. And so having a very high ceiling when it came to the free tier in terms of resource requests, that kind of gave me peace of mind when compared to the competition that was a little bit more stingy. So for me, it was easy. Just go ahead and go with Cloudflare. And so when it came to start coding the website, I didn't just, open my IDE and just start hacking away at my keyboard. The very first thing I did was I went to Claude. I outlined the rough idea just to sort of validate the concept and determine whether or not it was worth making something like this, whether it was fun, whether it was worthwhile. So I prompted out a very vague sort of outline for the game I was trying to make, just to sort of get a sense of its functionality. And after a quick 1 to 2 minutes, Claude came out with this. And for the amount of time that I really spent typing a prompt in, the fact that I got this much out of it is honestly pretty crazy. Now, there are a few issues with this website. There are a number of missing features. The layout is kind of rough. I don't know if you can tell, but this is the reveal square and the color helper is all the way down here underneath the grid. So players would click the reveal and then go down here and then come up here and then up here and then down here. And there were a number of bugs with this iteration as well. But all that being said, this was actually a great starting point. Just having the guest submission functionality and the grid down here working was enough of a launchpad for me to just go ahead and say, okay, let me take this code right here and work on top of it. So believe it or not, what you see here actually ended up being iterated on until it eventually became this right here. And I did take a few screenshots as to how that process took place. I do wish I had taken more screenshots during development, but if you really wanted to see how the project took shape over time, you could go through the commit history on the GitHub page right here and see it for yourself, if you're curious, of course. Now, I want to take some time to talk about some of the core design decisions that were made during development for this website. And the very first one I want to talk about is the color controls right here. As I said previously, this right here, this is a very integral part to the game. These are highly interactable elements, so making sure that I got them right and that they felt good was very important to me. And if you remember with Claude's very first iteration, the color helper tool is at the bottom, and it does look a lot different to what we got in the end here. And that's because the iteration here is actually some kind of native OS/browser implementation. I'm not exactly sure where this was pulled from, but this isn't a custom solution. This is probably from some kind of library. And what would happen is when you would click this little square here, it would open this color utility. As far as proof of concept goes, this is really good. It is unfortunately using RGB, and the UI doesn't really match what we ultimately went for. But apart from the fact that something like this would render inconsistently depending on the user's device, because remember, you'd have to click into this thing and then it would open the utility. Also, despite having that two-step process of having to actually click that thing and then having it open up, the biggest reason as to why I ended up scrapping this is because of this right here. This is a color pipette. If you don't already know what this does, the user can click on it and then click on anything on their screen, any object, any color, and then have that translated back into the picker here. Now, do you see the problem with having something like this in a game about guessing colors? The key concern was that players would be able to click the pipette, use it on the mystery color, get the corresponding output, and then cheese their way to victory, basically. So it became very clear to me once I saw that this was present that I was going to have to create my own custom solution that only provided the necessary features relevant to HexGuessr's gameplay. The custom solution is also a lot more consistent across devices, so it was pretty much a no-brainer as far as implementing my own solution. The second major design decision I want to talk about with HexGuessr is its layout. Now, as you can see, I am on the desktop version of the site, and we do have a lot of dead space here on the left and right, and that's because the layout you're seeing here has to be functional across every single device that this game is played on. So regardless of whether you're on a desktop, you're on a phone, you could be playing on a smart fridge, it doesn't matter. HexGuessr has to render consistently and show up the same across devices. So what this means is that HexGuessr has a static layout, and the position of the elements will never shift or reorient themselves. And just for example, I want to show you this game here. This is called Wordle. This is also a Wordle spin-off. It's about guessing the daily NBA player, but that's not important. What I want to show you with this site is that as I resize the window, you can see the individual elements changing size and readjusting their position on screen to fit the narrowing viewport. As you can see, I'm making it narrow and narrower, and the position of the buttons is changing to accommodate that. If I were to try this with HexGuessr, you'll notice that as I shrink the viewport, what happens is all of HexGuessr's UI elements will shift at the same rate and become smaller uniformly. And the way HexGuessr does this is by using a global scale token. So if I go into the CSS file and I scroll down, I will find a variable called appScale. So this variable here determines the range of sizes each element can be depending on the viewport width, and every single other sizing variable utilizes this exact value to determine its own size. So as you can see, appScale is used across every single sizing variable, and each element will determine its own size with respect to the appScale value. What this does is ensure that every element grows and shrinks at the exact same rate. So regardless of whatever device you're playing on, everything will render correctly and uniformly. The main idea behind having a static layout was to ensure that none of these crucial elements like the color preview or the canvas or slider get cut off on a niche user environment. It would really suck as a user if you just completely lost access to this item right here or the usage of the color canvas. So standardizing the layout was a trade-off I made with form in order to gain stability and functionality. What this results in on mobile is we get this nice vertical stacked layout where the color controls take up the full width of the screen, so you get maximum surface area to interact with these elements. And on desktop, you get no functional compromise despite this layout maybe not taking advantage of the width of the screen here. You get that consistent hierarchy regardless of the device that you're playing on. Now, while having good controls and a good layout was important to the foundation of HexGuessr, if the overall gameplay and progression system wasn't good, sure, I'd have a very thoughtful piece of software, but I'd also have a very boring game. So it was critical that I nailed the feedback system. Balancing this system here was the difference between making a game that was challenging enough and making a game that was either too challenging or way too easy. And originally when I first drafted the idea for HexGuessr, I only had green, yellow, and gray. So I had green for correct, yellow for off by 1, and then gray for off by more than 1. There was no orange cell here for off by 2 or 3. And that is inherently much more difficult. So in addition, the player was granted a maximum of 6 guesses instead of 5 like we have now. But despite having that 6th guess, gameplay using that old system was extremely tedious because unless you were spacing out your guesses perfectly, you were not guaranteed a win. and even if you were off by a relatively small amount, you would still be punished harshly for it because the amount of information given to the player was just so minimal. And so by implementing these orange cells here, the player gets much more information and much more coverage with each guess, so narrowing down the correct value becomes a lot easier and a lot less frustrating. Now, I did end up settling with orange being off by 2 or 3, not to give away too much information because otherwise the game gets too easy, and I did do a lot of work to make sure that this new system was up to par, and after a little bit of testing, I realized that a perfect player in HexGuessr with this new system could guarantee themselves a win in at most 5 guesses. So I decided to shrink the maximum number of attempts allowed from 6 to 5. This change actually keeps HexGuessr in line with Wordle because a perfect player there can guarantee themselves a win in at most 6 guesses. So by lowering the maximum number of attempts to 5 instead of 6, the threat of losing is still there. So the level of challenge is maintained, but it doesn't punish players who just got unlucky. I made HexGuessr as a portfolio piece, so all of the code relevant to the game is completely visible on its GitHub repository. And this is perfectly fine when it comes to the mechanics of the game, its logic, its aesthetics. If you want to learn about it or you want to use it for yourself, you're more than welcome. But it does become problematic when it comes to the daily color algorithm. So the daily color algorithm lives here under function/API in this daily color JS file. And this right here is the algorithm that derives the daily color each and every day. So I'm not in the backend manually putting in a new daily color. What happens is this algorithm will determine what the color will be every day automatically. This is, however, somewhat problematic because if this code is completely visible and able to be deconstructed, what that means is that players will now be able to predict future colors well in advance. And I did talk about cheating just a little bit ago when I talked about the usage of the pipette tool in the native OS color picker solution that was drafted by Claude. And obviously we're trying to prevent cheating as much as possible. We established that being able to cheat within the confines of the game itself via this pipette tool here is just bad game design. However, cheating in Wordle style games isn't exactly a real challenge. I basically demonstrated that in the beginning of the video when I searched up the Wordle answer for today. So we're not trying to protect for all forms of cheating, just low levels of cheating. If the player has to jump through a number of hoops to cheat, it's not something that I should essentially concern myself with protecting for. And that's because people play games like Wordle for the thrill of the challenge. There's nothing to really gain just by knowing the answer outright. There's no progression system. It's all about the puzzle. It's all about the fun. However, if extraneous cheating doesn't just affect today's game, but affects games in the future, essentially what that means is that a player could jump through a few hoops just one time and be able to exploit the game days, weeks, months, years in advance if they wanted to. Now it's not just today's color that's compromised, but every color in the future. So the question for me became, how could I keep the code public and uncrackable? How could I keep everything unobscured and protect the functionality of HexGuessr's daily mode? And the solution was to implement a secret salt variable. Now the value of this secret salt isn't actually set here. It's set on Cloudflare. So as you can see, I'm in the Cloudflare dashboard and I'm in my deployment settings and we have a value called secret salt with its value encrypted. And so the value of the salt is set at the host. And what this means is that this unknown value can now be used in conjunction with the known algorithm to create an unknown output. So as you can see, the algorithm is completely visible and it is set up as a Cloudflare pages function. And so because the salt is at the host, this algorithm also runs at the host, but it's completely visible here. And the way this algorithm works is it computes an HMAC, which is a hash-based message authentication code. And it computes that by taking today's date as a string and then combining it with the secret salt value. That output is then sliced converted into RGB, and then translated into hex. What this ultimately means is that the final outcome is going to be deterministic. The same date will always produce the same color, but unless you have that specific salt, you're not going to be able to reproduce that computation. And so at the end of it all, the repo has the function file, just not the salt. And what that means is that the way the color is derived is fully understandable and everything is still fully visible, but predicting tomorrow's color is no easier than breaking HMAC itself, and that thwarts the risk of future colors being exposed. And while the algorithm cannot be reverse engineered to predict future colors, it still gets called to resolve today's color, because that is how daily mode works. And that call lives at hexguessr.com/API/dailycolor. If you were to go to this URL for yourself, you would be met with this page right here with a no cheating tag at the top left. Now, this is an intentional obscurity. I created a 403 page because if this page wasn't here, you would get the daily color and the date for the day. So this is a means of preventing low-level cheating. However, if you were to instead curl this exact same URL into your terminal, you would get an output that looks like this. So I ran this command online just to simulate what it would look like in a terminal, and as you can see, we got the hex code for today, which was 3929B0, for today, which was July 6th. The reason why curling this URL will still work is because curling will return the JSON, whereas searching it up in the browser doesn't. And that's because curl doesn't send the same browser fetch headers, so that critical check never trips and you get this output here. And again, something like this would fall under that extraneous cheating category that I talked about previously. This is basically akin to Googling the Wordle answer. It's just out of the way enough to where I really don't have to protect for it, essentially. And every time you load into daily mode, it's making that call to that algorithm. Now, if the call fails, this page doesn't load. And initially, there was no catch page. So what would happen is if the load failed, you would just get a blank screen and you would be pretty much unsure of, what went wrong or if something went wrong, to be specific. So to prevent that, I developed a catch page. If you go to inspect and you go to network, we can record the network activity of the page. So it says currently recording network activity. So if I reload the page, you will see that daily mode has loaded, and right here is the algorithm that derives the daily color. Now, if I were to block requests from this algorithm call, just block requests from the URL and then reload the page, as you can see, the page has failed to load because I have blocked the daily color request. Because it has failed to load, we get this nice little catch page that says couldn't load today's mystery color. And this lets the player know that something has gone wrong either on the client end or the server end, but for whatever reason the daily color couldn't have been loaded, and they get this little button here to retry and reload the page and see if it will work, but obviously it's not going to because we have the algorithm blocked. But more importantly, for whatever reason, if they aren't able to get the daily mode working, because the non-game UI elements are still maintained, like the title, the mode selector, all of these buttons here, they're not locked out of playing the game, right? Because they can still click the unlimited mode button here and play unlimited mode if they wanted to, because again, unlimited mode doesn't call any external resources and you can still play HexGuessr even if daily mode is down. Now, ideally, retry would work and would send another call and then, the page would load. So if I just unblock this right here and then I click retry, yeah, there you go. So ideally, this is what would happen if the player hits retry. And before I end this video, I do want to take a moment to talk about some of the final bits of polish that I added to HexGuessr during development. And because HexGuessr is a very forward-facing project, basically anybody with the URL can come and look at it and try it. It was very important to me that I make sure that I got all of the little details right and that the experience was as good as could possibly be for everybody. Ultimately, what that meant for me was accounting for tiny details that nobody would probably ever even notice or think about. An example of one such detail would be the way that stale games are handled on HexGuessr. So originally, before I had implemented the fix, if you had a stale game open, let's say you were playing a daily game from a few days ago and you decided to quit halfway through, maybe you just forgot about it and you went out to do something else, and then you came back to it a few days later to complete it. If you were to complete that stale game, ideally you should be able to, as soon as you complete it, refresh the page and play today's fresh color. But before the eventual fix was actually implemented, what would happen is completing a stale game would end up locking you out of completing today's game, because the game would register your completion of that old stale game as completing today's game, basically, if that makes sense. So I had to implement stale game handling in order to ensure that a player would never have to experience that. Other small things like serving the font locally from the repo and not externally was also very important. I wanted to make sure that the look of HexGuessr was consistent across devices. So regardless of whatever device you're playing HexGuessr on, whatever browser, whatever OS, it should render as intended. And HexGuessr fonts are under the assets folder, and they come in multiple formats. So if they need to degrade or your browser just doesn't support a certain format, you can always default to a version that may be compatible. Now, the biggest piece of obscure polish I want to talk about involves this text right here. So on mobile devices, HexGuessr is already maximally optimized to take as much advantage of that narrow viewport as possible. And so because of that, the layout is already perfectly scaled to the device and vertically scrollable. This is how HexGuessr is meant to be played. And because of that, zooming in while playing on HexGuessr is something you're probably never going to want to do. And the reason is because if you were to zoom in, certain game elements would get cut off and you'd all of a sudden be able to horizontally scroll the page. And as we established previously, HexGuessr is meant to be perfectly vertically scrollable and only vertically scrollable. So for mobile devices specifically, it was important to catch little quirks that would cause the device to unintentionally zoom in. One of those niche things was the double tap to zoom. So if you've scrolled on a browser before, you're on a web page, if you were to double tap on an element, what would happen is it would cause that element to zoom in. And for a game like HexGuessr where you're tapping away, let's say you're tapping at the keyboard here, if you were to double tap a key, for example, you wouldn't want to all of a sudden just start zooming in on that key, because that would be very annoying. So in HexGuessr's JS, there are some methods that handle and catch double taps and make sure that they don't register and trigger a zoom. Now, obviously, eliminating zoom entirely would be an accessibility oversight. Some people do need to zoom in and they do need that functionality. So pinch to zoom still does work. So if you pinch your screen, you can zoom in and out. But the biggest hurdle when it came to unintentional zoom was with this text field right here. Now, on iOS, if you were to tap into a text field where the text inside of that field was 16 CSS pixels or less, what would happen is the screen will automatically zoom in to help you see that supposedly small text. And because every single element on screen derives its size from the app scale variable, it may or may not render at 16 CSS pixels or more. It could fall under that threshold. So depending on the size of your device, this text here will be completely readable, sure, but it might register as less than 16 CSS pixels. And if you were to click into that field, you would get that annoying little zoom, and that would be absolutely atrocious. So the fix was to always declare the text in this field here at 16 CSS pixels or higher. So in the code itself, this text will always meet that minimum threshold. Now, the text as a result might not be the right size to fit into this container. So once this text size is declared in the code, it is then visually transformed afterwards to correctly fit this container here. So ultimately, the browser will always see 16 CSS pixels or higher, but the user will see it rendered at the correct size at the end of the day. But other than that, that's all I really have to say about this project. Overall, it was really fun to make. It helped get me oriented with web development and hosting fundamentals. And I also ended up dabbling with search engine optimization. I ended up using tools like Google Search Console and Bing Webmaster. And if you were to search up HexGuessr on Google right now, this is one of the top 3 search results. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And working on this project here has also given me some valuable experience to take with me into some future projects. I'm really excited to share those with you as well, but I will only do so when they are ready. But as far as this one right here, it is really cool to have a unique entry into that Wordle Spinoff space, to go from someone who was only really ever playing other people's renditions to now having made my own. And it's also super nice to just have something tangible you can click on and play at the end of the day, and not just a bunch of folders sitting dormant in a GitHub repo. But yeah, that's pretty much all there is to it. If you have any input you want to give or any criticisms, feel free, share them. If you have any ideas on how things could have been made better, please let me know. I'm always looking to improve. And actually, I do want to make note of the organization of the repo. I am aware that this isn't the best way to go about it. I mean, as you can see, all of the CSS is in one file, all of the JS is in one file, all of the HTML is in one file. There are some outliers here and there. You have the HTML file for the 404 page. You also have the JS Cloudflare pages function. Having it set up like this did make development a lot quicker, but if I were to redo this project, I would definitely optimize for organization. But as I was nearing the end, I just decided it wouldn't be worth it to spend time organizing, so I've left it as is. Although, yes, I am aware that the organization isn't the greatest. And that's pretty much all I have to say. Thank you for watching. If you haven't already, try out HexGuessr and have a great day. Bye-bye.